Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist worldwide.
Natalie's got a daughter who wanted a goldfish. Now, she's got a really busy life. It's just one of those typical teen lives where she's always out and about and going here and there, and you don't have time for a goldfish. Oh, I really want one. No, you just think you want one. You don't want it. I want a goldfish. All right, fine. She goes out and she comes back. I think it was the same day I heard about it. Look, it's a goldfish. This little goldfish kits, I guess. You get the tank and the rocks and the little coral thing and the plant or whatever, and a little goldfish. So that sets the tank up. I have a cat. No, hang on with me. It's not, just take the journey with me. There's no murder involved, okay? There's no loss of life in this particular account. I'm telling you a story, okay? So she's got this little fish tank. It's one of those little 1-gallon jobs in there. She's got the air stone. I mean, I don't know what it is. She's got it set up in there, and she's got it on a counter that stands about 3.5 feet off the ground. And the cat likes to go in and just kind of watch, just like you and I might watch the Discovery Channel, or more appropriately, the Food Network. Just kind of looking, wow, that looks yummy. I mean, I'm trying to figure what might be going on in the cat's mind. A few weeks later, we walk in and we we see that where the fish tank normally would sit on the counter, it was gone. Natalie discovered it first. I think she walked in there for something. Where's your fish? Where's the... Oh, my God. Why is the floor wet? What happened in here? How come there's water and fish rocks all over? Now it becomes apparent what has happened. Now, I don't think the cat pushed the fish tank off onto the ground. I think the cat was up there, and he's kind of freaky. If there's any loud noise, somebody bangs a pan, you're unloading the dishwasher, a door closes too loud, there's something on the television, the cat will automatically go from an inert position to full freak rocket mode. Just, and I think that's what happened. And I think the cat was up there watching. Does the fish even have a name? I don't even think the fish has a name. Just watching. And I think what happened is something startled it. And the cat flips out, runs off, bam, and knocks the fish tank over. And we walk in, and to our horror, there is this goldfish, not in water, lying on the carpet. Now, I'm already like heartbroken. Oh my God, the fish is suffocated to death. It wasn't in water. There's still a little bit of water left somehow in the bottom of this tank. We scoop the fish up. We put him in there, and lo and behold, it's like he's Lazarus. He comes back from the dead. Actually, he wasn't dead to begin with, but it's a better story if you tell it that way. Now, he obviously looks a little rattled, but he's alive. And it must have just happened. We must have gotten to him just in the nick of time. Somebody in the chat room said Lazarus is a great fish name. You know what? You're right. Went back, cleaned up the mess, toweled up all the water, scooped up all the fish rocks, refilled the tank, acclimated him to the water, and now he's like nothing ever happened. Now, is little Lazarus sitting in there thinking, there must have been a reason this happened to me. Nothing happens by accident in this crazy world. God wanted to build my character. So he wanted to see just how much fortitude I would show under duress. And so he allowed this adversity in my life. I was near death. I saw the white light. I was this close to the edge, man. Wonder if he was like, you know what? I hovered over my little fish body. I looked down, I saw myself right there on the carpet. I heard everybody talking about me too, like I was dead. And I had a choice. My maker told me, you can either go to fishy heaven, or I will send you back, because you still have work left to be done. Which I guess is swimming essentially in circles for the next year while somebody taps on the glass occasionally. Did he see a higher meaning in what happened? Maybe it's a hugely awkward segue. I just thought it was a funny story myself. And in my mind, it's occasionally how I see the human condition. We look around and we see crazy stuff happening to us. Could be anything. It could be something amazing. It could be something horrible. And it's all over. It's behind us, and we have a chance to catch our breath. And we say, you know what? There's a reason this happened. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I don't have a whole lot prepared. This is going to be a conversation between you and me, and I've got a couple of articles I'd like to share with you tonight. I'm just going to read them. We're going to qualify what reason means, by the way, because for some people, everything happens for a reason means like a plan. This happened to me because this was part of a larger master plan, which is common language. If you are religious or formerly religious, this is not news to you. Right? You get a raise at work. It's not as often, in my experience, that you hear someone say, I worked my ass off. And I made the sacrifices, and I delivered excellence, and I earned a promotion or a bonus or a pay increase. If you're in a religious culture, at least a relatively devout one, you say, the Lord blessed us. I'm so blessed in my life. Lord bless me today. I got to tell everybody about it. God is so good. God is good. Amen. I've seen people, they see that as part of a design. There's a reason this happened. God must have wanted me to have a greater sphere of influence in my life. He wanted us to have more resources so we could tithe more. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to say, but everything is part of a design. There's a blueprint in place. Even the small stuff. Hey, look, there's a parking space second from the front. There's no one else around. It's not like we even have to compete for it. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Somebody in your family suffers from an illness. Maybe it's you. In our weakness, He is strong. Everything happens for a reason. These pat answers used to be satisfying to me, and I get why they are so popular. After all, who wouldn't want to feel like there is a plan? I always feel like the Joker. It's all part of the plan. I want to start with an article by Austin Klein. I actually dropped him an email and asked for permission to just read this thing. I thought it was a good way to start the show. I like the way he articulated it. It sort of provides the perfect springboard for the rest of the conversation we're going to have. So very much appreciated, Austin. And I'll link to this article in the description box of the podcast. And the article is titled, with a question mark, "Everything Happens for a Reason?" He says, sooner or later, every skeptic will encounter the belief, a firm conviction that everything happens for a reason. You'll find this in pretty much every demographic. Liberal religious believers, conservative religious believers, fundamentalists, and of course, New Age believers. They all disagree on where the reason is coming from and why it exists, but they're equally convinced that there are reasons and that they are important. The belief that everything happens for a reason is employed as an explanation for just about everything that happens. Every good and every bad thing that occurs in people's lives is, quote, explained in this manner. It reinforces the idea that we are subject to forces beyond our control and should perhaps submit meekly, hoping for the best. This is a big part of what's wrong with this belief. It encourages passivity in the face of life's problems. In Living Without God, New Directions for Atheists, Agnostics, Secularists, Ronald Aronson writes, "The most common and least recognizably weird of weird beliefs is everything happens for a reason. We hear the phrase at every turn in the United States today. Spouses telling why they met each other or why they broke up. One baseball player explaining why he didn't make the team. Another explaining why he made the team. Or anyone reflecting on a coincidence. A student softening the blow of a failing grade, a cancer patient coming to grips with her illness, good happenings or bad, personal tragedies, disasters, matters of chance, striking coincidences, enormous disappointments, the unexpected, all become rationalized as being part of a larger plan. The maxim mixes events that have comprehensible causes beyond our control or that we produce from our own actions with things that are pure accidents. All become the mush of a totally deterministic universe in which every last thing has a meaningful cause, but no one knows what it is, or is planned by a superhuman mind, presumably directing things for the best, and whose logic is also unknowable. Our map of interdependence is erased, with all of its specific details supplanted by a vague and unrecognizable force or will. One's responsibility for oneself and the world dissolves into this, and those who may be held culpable, individuals and institutions, are spared any reproach for whatever goes wrong. As this low-grade sense of fate or God or whatever percolates below the surface of American life today, many of us who lack a sense of control over our lives fall back on it, as do many traditionally religious people, and so do many others. And it cannot be completely dismissed. Everything happens for a reason claims vaguely that what we experience, but whose reasons we can't comprehend, is part of a larger pattern, which is often true. It expresses people's hunch, often quite wise, that What happens is linked to larger forces and causes than those we have been trained to grasp. It is often a wish to see justice done, even if only ultimately, and a hope for real meaning where there seems to be sheer randomness, but the event winds up buried in a half-baked sense of destiny. Life's disappointments and absurdities, its systematic evils and unspeakable barbarities all become less disturbing. Accidents are banished. An overall order is proclaimed to govern us, and bad things only happen for a larger good. Everything, after all, is meant to happen. But this casts things in a way that usually ends discussion, rather than beginning it. A healthy sense of linkages, larger purposes and logics and forces beyond our control might lead someone to an environmental, epidemiological, sociological, political, economic, and historical study and yield important insight. What if we work at making this vague intuition concrete, rather than recirculating empty profundities? We can often get somewhere as long as we're willing to admit that things may be happening randomly, or for no reason at all, or for dozens of reasons. We can connect the dots if we see a discernible pattern. And we have to learn how to shrug our shoulders when they don't. Yes, much of life happens because we ourselves have brought it about. And if we take responsibility for this and bring it into the light of day rather than assigning it to forces beyond our control, we can begin to understand our fate a little better. But also much of life happens by chance, is inherently beyond anyone's control, and if we strengthen our ability to tell when this is happening and when it is not, we'll be able to better know when to submit and when to resist. Making sense depends on knowing when to deploy the one approach and when to give up and use the other. That's the end of the excerpt from the book. Back to Austin's article. He says, "It is, of course, true that there are reasons for everything that happen around us. So the statement, everything happens for a reason, is true, but only in a trivial sense and not in the sense that people intend it. When people say this, they mean there is some sort of plan or guiding force behind everything that happens around and to us. It is, however, not our plan and not our will behind it. This means we don't need to feel responsible for it. Not for it happening and not for changing or fixing it, if there's something wrong with it. Sometimes the lack of responsibility can be a relief. Sometimes we really can't do anything about what's happening, and being told that there's a reason or plan may help make it easier for people to deal with this. In principle, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but it comes with the risk of preventing us from recognizing those other times when we can do something. Maybe we won't be able to do much, but we can act if we choose to do so, and it would be wrong to miss the chance to affect events around us simply for the sake of some extra comfort on other occasions." A great article from Austin Klein from About.com. Again, I'll link it in the description box of this podcast after the show. I'd like to find out what you have to say on the matter. Let's start with area code 810. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hi, Seth. This is Kelly.
Kelly, thank you for waiting.
Here
Thanks
with
for
my
calling.
son, Christian.
I remember you and Christian. I'm glad you called the show. How you guys doing these days?
Doing good. Doing very well. Getting to listen to you live again on one of the rare occasions. But
I feel like you two called me today for a reason. I sense a reason, an overall plan or design in this call. So what do you have for me tonight?
Well, it's like there was some sort of guiding force, just calling me to call you.
Well, what do you think? Give me some.
Well, the reason is because I wanted to say hi. And also, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I absolutely will not go into the long history of why this particular topic struck me, but other than say that I grew up in a group home, was a ward of the state of Indiana when I was much younger, and always felt like that experience was, that I was there and I had managed to somehow come out of that experience for a reason. And this was before the critical thinking phase of my life really kicked in the last few years. But like I said, I grew up in a group home. I was a ward of the state of Indiana. But I always felt like that experience was driving me to find some, to foster kids or to really do other things with kids or to help troubled kids, to kind of keep them out of the system. That I had a couple teachers who really stood up for me and had given me the gift of being able to escape this statistically challenging situation, okay? In that, because of those experiences and because I felt like this was the reason that I had gone through these things, I actually sought out an opportunity several years ago to bring my niece into my home and get custody of my niece rather than allowing her to go into the system. So my point is that it was because of my experiences in growing up that I sought out or kept an open mind or looked for opportunities to almost find a reason to develop that reason. And I think that a lot of people would look at that and say, well, the reason he went through those experiences was because it was preordained and it was God's plan that you were going to bring your niece into this and save her from going into the system. And I really thought about that and thought, I kind of sought out that experience and looked for those opportunities myself. I don't know that it was preordained that that's why I went through them. I rather took those past experiences and sought out a new familiar experience.
I used to say that when I was in Christian radio, I saw all of the years previous when I was a young person, when I was standing on stage leading chapel services, when I was a student leader, student council president, when I was a spokesperson for Youth for Christ, when I was, all of these different types of things. Oh, look, my voice changed and it's relatively deep, and I'm able to communicate. I think all those years in junior high and high school were purposed to form me into my career as a Christian minister on the radio, or at least a Christian entertainer broadcaster on the radio. And that's how I used to justify it. This is my destiny, And now I look at it and I think, well, it was probably just a natural segue because my gifts happened to be communication. I was kind of a ham. I was a natural leader. I mean, I would naturally probably end up in some kind of a position that way. And honestly, you look at where I'm at now. Look, I'm hosting an infidel podcast being heard all around the world. Well, if you're going to say everything happens for a reason, well, then you also have to say that the reason I'm able to speak with such authority and experience about the Christian culture and Christian broadcasting is because I was prepared as part of a master plan with 12 years in Christian radio. God allowed these years to happen to me so that I could then be more prepared to go out and tell everybody that he's a phantom. It's one of those things. I think it's cause and effect. What are your gifts? What are your life experiences? The reason I'm passionate about what I do is because of my past. The reason you're passionate about helping a foster child or about helping children in general is because of what happened to you.
Yes. Hey, can I ask, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, but I do have where is the chat room you always respond to? Could you please help me with that? And maybe there's other people out there that are as much a dumbass as I am and can't find it.
Not at all. Actually, I'm glad you brought it up because occasionally we have tens and tens and tens of thousands of people who listen to this show in archive. But those who do listen live as it airs on Blog Talk Radio often ask me two questions. They ask me, how do I call in and where's the chat room? Well, if you go to the bottom of the show page that I post, and I always post them on Facebook and Twitter the day of the show, often a few days before, you'll see me say, show starts in an hour. Here's the link. If you go to that link, the link that you listen to the show on, and you scroll to the bottom, there should be a chat window at the bottom. You will see a call-in number at the top of the page. And those of you who try to Skype into the switchboard, for some reason, Blog Talk Radio does not activate the Skype call-in option to my switchboard until the show actually begins. So you can actually call in up to 15, 20 minutes in advance. But if you're trying to Skype into the show, you can't do so. You can't queue up in the switchboard until the show starts. I do not know why. Did I get you there, Kelly? Did you find it?
Yep, I'll get there. Hey, I just real quick wanted to say that I'm sorry I missed you in Austin. I know you hooked up with my friend Jay, who you also met at the Reason Rally, and I told him to say hi to you, but I will catch up with you next time, and thanks so much for all you do. I'm blown away by it.
Thanks, man. Well, you and Christian take care, and thanks for being a part of the show, man.
Excellent.
All right, take it easy. And for those of you who are in the chat room and listening live, thank you. so much for being a part of the show. I don't often get a chance to really see what's happening in the chat room because I'm crap at multitasking. So I'm talking to you, I'm reading the prep material, I'm going through the switchboard, and there's something going on in chat. I occasionally look that direction, but I have a hard time really being able to focus. Plus, my eyes are going. Look, I don't know what happened. 3 years, I'm way off. 3 years ago, I had like 20/20 vision. 4. Pretty close. And all of a sudden, my eyes are they're gone. I'm doing that thing where everything you read, you're changing you're holding it in your hand and you're moving it different distances in front of your face. Honey, what does that say? That menu is so small and it's dark in here. I can't read it. Honey, would you read that? What does that say? Where are my glasses? Has become one of the most common things heard in my home. And so now as I'm doing the show, it's even harder to see what's going on. I'm got the switchboard and I've got the chat room. I'm over there and it's, of course it's scrolling 100 miles an hour and everybody's talking in different fonts and different colors. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't even keep up. Oh, thank you. Now somebody's got like a 18-point font. Yeah, Johnny, these kids today, these fonts are too small. I can't even read them. 513, thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Mario.
Mario, thanks for calling. What's up?
Well, it's funny you should mention about your vision. It's one of the things that came to mind when we were talking about, happened for a reason. If you may remember, I took a early retirement because I had lost my vision about 8 years ago. You remember that?
I remember us actually having the discussion as to how you were able to use the internet and different programs and whatnot. It was fascinating stuff. So.
Yeah, I use a screen reader that reads whatever is on the screen, and it does a pretty good job. So I just wanted to let you know you're not getting any pity from me.
Now I feel totally like a loser. Like, I'm bitching because I got to put on reading glasses, and you're calling me, telling me you don't have any sight. Thanks, man. I'm so sorry.
You're welcome. I just wanted to set things straight. Well, in keeping in the theme of your podcast, when I went to started visiting a congregation shortly after, because it was a huge emotional thing for me to have to quit a job I loved, and my family fell apart. It was horrible, and so for several years I was kind of involved in this Christian group, and I still have friends among them. But that's the stuff I would hear. Mario, it's happening for a reason. God's going to strengthen your inner character. And I kept saying, well, why couldn't he do that without taking my eyesight? Can I go for plan B here?
Now, were you at any point in this process a believer, or were you already totally a non-believer when this happened to you?
Well, it's an interesting question because I kind of went full circle. You know how Matt Delahunty and yourself started as Christians and became unbelievers. I was an unbeliever up until the age of 50. And in fact, I used to love to lock horns with Christians. Yeah, I remember when I was going to school on campus, for some reason I was a magnet for these, come to Christ people.
Yeah.
And I would just, tie them up and send them running with their tail between their legs, going, man, I don't want to talk to this guy. But I think under the emotional stress that happened to me, because all of this stuff happened in a very short period of time, and I was just basically had a nervous breakdown, and I guess I was vulnerable, so I became a believer. In fact, I became a believer with such intensity. I actually spent 5 years learning Hebrew and then learning Greek because I wanted to read the Bible in its original language. And I started Bible studies. I went the whole thing, and I think the more I learned about the Bible, the less I started, feeling compelled. And I think not too long ago, I realized, well, I had to kind of be easy on myself. I mean, I fell for it because I needed that kind of support at the time, and there was no other. There was nothing else. And but now I see that that's I was under very stressful circumstances, but like I said, keeping with your theme, they tried to boost my morale by saying, there's a reason for it, and it made me feel good, made me feel important.
Sure. I think we're desperate to extract hope and purpose from almost anything in certain times of our lives. So, how are you today? I mean, are you a happy guy? Do you struggle with bitterness? Do you ever just get pissed off that it happened, or are you in a good place?
Well, I can't get pissed off anymore because I really don't have any person or entity to get pissed off at. Yeah. You see, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think because I think you've experienced this. Once you realize there's no divine entity, supervising everything, you don't have anyone to go to other than yourself and people that are close to you. But I get pissed off, but I do it, I think, in a healthy way. If I open up a can of what I think is Skyline chili and it turns out to be tomato sauce, I go, oh, crap, I just wasted it. But, I get over it. Then I think, okay, well, what can I make with tomato sauce?
That's a good way to be, man. Well, thanks for sharing your perspective and for keeping things in perspective for me. I appreciate you, brother.
Well, let me ask you a philosophical question. Again, being on theme. You made a statement here. I think everything is cause and effect. Remember that statement you made a little while ago?
I mean, that's pretty much where I fall. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. From a philosophical perspective, if there's cause and effect on the one hand and random on the other, what is the definition of random?
I define random sometimes too broadly. It's like this twister that hit Moore, Oklahoma, we've been talking about for the past 8 days. And it just chewed up a neighborhood, and everybody's invoking God. God is there to heal the wounded hearts of the survivors, and God will embolden us as we rebuild, and God gives us courage, and God is our strength in our time of weakness. And I've been guilty. I'll say something like, well, this is just a random event. This is a twist. But in truth, there's an actual reason that the twister happened at that time, at that moment, in that place. There are meteorological reasons that it happened. Now, what I used to say a random event is that it wasn't done with a sense of purpose. It wasn't intelligently driven. It was a product of explainable environmental causes. And that's often where I sort of slip into random. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and so in your definition, there's still cause and effect involved.
It's like when somebody says, do you believe in evolution and the Big Bang, and you don't believe in a prime mover, supreme dictator, you don't believe in a creator? And I'll say, well, I don't believe there's any evidence of that. And they say, so you just think everything here just happened? And I about climb the walls. You think we're this all random? And I look around and I go, well, I see cause and effect. You can trace our evolution. You can see the purpose behind it. Not purpose like it was part of a plan, but you can see the transitional fossils and how genetics and environmental concerns actually shape how evolution works. There's a cause and effect to it. So when somebody comes to me and they say, so you think it's all just random and we just showed up here one day? That's absolutely incorrect. There are tangible reasons, even the ones we may not be able to explain yet. We don't have the information. We're not smart enough. We haven't evolved enough as a species. We're still figuring it out. But there's a reason it happened. I honestly really do think that there's an explanation for everything, even if we can't yet pin it down.
sounds like then we have a definition problem, because it sounds like there's multiple definitions of the word reason, and there's multiple definitions of the word random.
How would you describe the events of the Moore, Oklahoma tornado? Do you call that a random event? Do you call it an explainable event? Was there a reason? How would you approach it?
Well, if you look at the two definitions that we're using for random, okay, if you use your definition in the sense that there was no higher purpose, I agree with you.
Yeah.
If you use the other definition of random, which is that there is no cause and effect, then I would say no, that's not the case. And there is a definition of random that in physics means that there is no discernible cause. For example, the half-life of deuterium or uranium, the radiation, the way it radiates is called by physics random, because there is no discernible cause for any particular emission of an alpha particle or a beta particle. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
So in physics, random means no, there's no discernible cause, and which of course is the key to completely disarming the apologist's argument about, you know, that which has a beginning must have a cause. Physics says no. That is categorically incorrect.
I think it's a little bit of a cop-out when someone says, so you think we're all just random. I think to myself, random is not the word I use when determining the origins of our species or even of our planet or cosmos. I mean, if you look back to the singularity of 13.7 billion years ago, how things are positioned within the cosmos is explainable in the light of this major singularity that happened, you know, sort of spinning everything out, and the universe continues to expand. And that this is Lawrence Krauss territory, you know, where I defer to that man's experience and wisdom much more than my own. But I don't look at the world and go, oh, the universe, and go, this is random. I say this is explainable. There are cause and effect reasons that the planets are aligned the way they are. Why the Earth is inhabitable. I don't see this as, hey, God reached down and made one planet in the solar system inhabitable for human life. Human life happened because this planet happened to be inhabitable.
In terms of your own anxiety, because I think when you're dealing with people who need to have a reason, I think you're looking at someone who is trying to reduce the anxiety in their life, and people deal with it in a lot of ways. Like my own vision, it caused a huge amount of anxiety, you know. I mean, when you can't even see the ground you're walking on, that's every time you put your foot down, you have, you know, is there going to be a sidewalk there? You know, is there going to be a hole there? Yeah, you know, so if you don't want to, you know, get alcohol or any drug, you know, if you want to deal with the anxiety the best way you can, sometimes religion can offer you something, even though it's not true, you know, but that release or relief from that anxiety, I think that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with Christians, and that's why they won't let go very readily. Now, you were able to, though, right? You were able to let go of that.
Well, it took a while. I mean, you know, I'm the extraction of one's self from the faith is a multi-tiered extraction. I mean, even though I intellectually come to the conclusion that it was all just a bunch of horseshit, it took me a little longer emotionally to deal with those irrational fears of hell. Yes. The loss, what I'd considered at the time to be sort of a loss of life destiny. I don't have a divine mission to go out and sort of earn jewels in my crown and one day be reunited with the people I care most about. And I mean, it was, so I sort of extracted myself first in my brain. I thought, oh, this just doesn't add up. But it took a little longer for me to get to the point where I no longer felt sort of emotionally. It's almost like a dysfunctional relationship where you're with someone that you know is destructive for you, but they are all you've ever known. They're all that they give. There's sort of, it's the devil, the security of at least, even if it sucks, at least what's going to happen tomorrow kind of a thing. And that was a hard one for me to crawl out of. I think it's hard for a lot of people, but hey, it's very doable, man. And honestly, once you get through that phase, life on the other side, just awesome. It's awesome. So, Mario, thanks for the call and for your perspective, man. I appreciate you listening, being part of the family.
All right. I appreciate it. We'll talk sometime soon.
Sounds good, brother. We'll see you later.
Bye.
I get comfort. I mean, and it's hard sometimes when people want to feel like they're in the embrace, they're being cradled in the arms of something and someone. I mean, I wouldn't, in my mind, when we talk about the events of the Moore, Oklahoma tornado or any disaster, and you see someone desperately seeking to sort of take these splinters that were their lives and glue them back together to something solid and try to figure out, how do I get past this emotionally, mentally? And for many of them, at least they think they need God. It is part of their coping mechanism. And that's a little tough because in my mind, I think, well, sometimes, you do what you got to do. Who would begrudge somebody whatever coping mechanism they needed to get through? But again, as I said at the end of the podcast last week, it ignores what I think is the larger question. Is it true? And can you truly, honestly heal in a healthy way if the mechanism you are using to heal is based on a falsehood? And, it's not a popular thing to say when people are grieving or and honestly, it has to be done delicately. And sometimes you have to choose your battles and decide to shut up. There are times we need to just shut our mouths. Look, if somebody's at the deepest valley of their grief over the loss of a loved one, the last thing you and I should be doing is going in there and having this particular fight. Who you think you're praying to? Jeez. He's the one that killed your whoever. And now he's going to reunite you in heaven? Come on. I think that's the height of callousness. We need to be more compassionate than that. I think in the grander scheme of things, in the larger stage, we need to be having these types of discussions, though, which is why occasionally on my Facebook page, even over the past week, we had the discussion about praying to the very God who did not rescue the children killed in the twister. Why pray to a deity that did nothing only moments before? Because it gives you comfort? Should we not, as reasonable people, examine this practice for whether or not it has merit? Shouldn't we take a harder look and see who are we praying to? Or was this an event that's explainable? And there's a reason this happened. Everything happens for a reason. Fine. This thing happened because the cold air mass and the hot air mass met right over this sort of hot spot for tornadoes. That's why they call it Tornado Alley, one of the most active spots in the world for twisters. And that sucker spun out of the sky and drilled itself into a town, several towns. I personally now, on the other side of the looking glass, find it a little bit offensive when somebody says it was all part of God's plan. I'm sorry. And don't give me that bullshit that I'm supposed to opt out of the discussion because his ways are greater than my ways and I'm not smart enough to understand the mind of God. That's just a total cop-out. I've had people tell me, who are you to question God? Who do you think you are? You're a mere human. You're just an insect to him. You don't even rate. You don't have the qualifications to put God to the test, which is ridiculous. Because the person who is telling me that I don't have the authority to put God to the test has put all of the other gods that they have rejected to the test. The guy that believes in Yahweh rejected Allah. He's rejected Thor and Zeus and Wotan, and he's rejected all the tens and tens of thousands of other deities. Well, how does someone come to the point where they are an atheist about all the other gods, but they accept one? It just doesn't even make sense. If we couldn't challenge, if we couldn't ask the questions, well, we're just easy meat for anyone and anything that comes along. These people who were telling me I'm not qualified to question or challenge God or to ask these hard questions or to say that I deserve to have at least a marginal understanding of what God is up to. I don't think that's unreasonable. The same people who tell me that I am unreasonable for asking these questions spent 3 weeks going through research before they bought a car. They looked online, they went to all the car websites, they visited 5 different car lots, they went to Blue Book, they went to Carfax, they checked this, they checked that, they joined Consumer Reports and got the report, and they checked the engine and the gas mileage and the safety record, and they test drove it 5 times, and they had a decision, they slept on it. You know what I'm saying? Look, the idea that these people live without a process for determining what has merit and what does not, it doesn't even wash. Why would you give so much merit to verifying that this is the right vehicle for you? This is the right home for you. You know what? You're going to send your kids to a certain school? Don't tell me you just did it at random. You'd probably checked it out, right? Where's the school? What's the security like? What are the teachers like? Any red flags? Anything we need to know? And they're just hugely critical. God, you know what? He's great. I love him so much. Who wrote the book of Genesis? I don't have the first clue, but you know what? I know it's true. How come there's no geological evidence for a global flood? You know what? God works in mysterious ways. And you know what? Science doesn't know everything anyway. Science doesn't know. Prove it didn't happen. You know, science is going to change its mind in 10 years anyway. How did people live to be 969 years old? When the average lifespan during that era was about 40. Well, you know what? You don't know. You don't know. I believe it. To accept without really knowing and taking real pleasure and pride in your own ignorance. We did a show a while back called Worshipping Ignorance. I got off on a total tangent. You know, these are the same people, though, if I may tie it back into our theme, that when craziness happens in this world, they say, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. Did you guys hear about that lady in, was it Lake Tahoe, California? First name was JC. Was kidnapped like 20 years, back in the early 90s. Kidnapped when she was 11. She's walking from her house to a bus stop to go to school, and she's kidnapped. And she remains missing for 18 years. Finally, I guess the guy that kidnapped her and was it another girl? He's walking around with him in public, and they see her, and they realize there's something suspicious going on, and finally she's reunited with her family. Now, they gave the guy like 400 years in prison. Just sent him forever on sexual assault charges, and who knows what horrors went on behind those closed doors, right? And I don't know how many freaking headlines said, it's a miracle she was returned home. Her miraculous recovery from this horrible trauma. Now, I'm all about hope. I'm all about rebuilding. I'm all about celebrating the fact that she was found and rescued and reunited with her family, and that there are some tools in place to help her and her family recover from this unthinkable event. But by saying it's a miracle and everything happens for a reason, is an insult to all moral creatures. God rescued her, it's a miracle, after 18 years. Can you imagine what her parents were going through? Can you imagine? Your daughter disappears at the age of 11, and you spend almost 2 decades not sleeping at night, maybe not touching anything that was in her bedroom, staring at her photographs, crying yourself to sleep, thinking about what might be happening to her, and then trying not to think about what might be happening to her. Or even worse, she's dead, and now it's just a matter of time before you find her. Who will find her? When is it going to happen? Will she be in a river? Is she off in a field? Is she in this state? Where was she taken? Was she in pain? Was she abused? How frightened was she? You can see her face. You can see her face that moment when someone grabbed her by the arm and shoved her in a car. You can feel her terror. And 18 years pass. And then it's a miracle. God allowed human beings to recognize that there was a problem when this sex offender walked in with two girls that may or may not have been his daughters. And praise Jesus, they were returned to their families. God, how do we get to a point where we paint God into this story? Because if you say, you know what, it's all part of a larger plan. Pain in this life, bliss in the next life. You know, God's not going to always intervene here. It's a fallen world. Satan has control, or better yet, you know what? We as a nation have fallen away from God, and so now he has removed his hand of protection. He didn't want to do nothing. He wanted to intervene, but he couldn't, because we as the United States of America have taken God out of our politics and out of our schools. We have removed him from the conversation, and therefore to punish us, which is essentially what's happening. Remember that guy who went in and shot up the elementary school? Horrible. Goes in with a semi-automatic or automatic weapon. Mows down those kindergartners. The next, was it even the next day, when the apologists and the pundits and the religious eggheads are on television telling us that the reason it happened is because we didn't pray in schools. Well, if you pull prayer out of schools, if you take God out of schools, he's not going to be there to protect you whenever the gunman walks in with an AR-15. It insults the intelligence. It insults our own morality. I saw a post on the Richard Dawkins website. And it was a satirical cartoon that they were forwarding on. And one character said, it was God, he said, have they allowed me into their schools yet? And one of the angels says, not yet. And he yelled, prepare the next school shooter. Trust me, his ambivalence and non-participation might as well be him in the room rooting the guy on. He's God. Well, you know what? The death of these young people, they're in a better place now. They're in a place, everything happens for a reason. It's all part of God's plan. Excuse me. Now, we're going to do a whole show on the problem of evil, right? Which is often treated by the religious as a counterfeit argument. You know what? You see bad things happening in this world and you blame God. Well, no, I don't believe in God. But what I'm saying is, if you are allegiant to a deity, this deity, the one in this book right here, right? This book, God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, God is loved us so much that he killed a part of himself to rescue us, to save us from the hell that he created. If you're going to treat him like a real being, then we're going to hold him to some standards of accountability. Hey, God, what were you doing during those 18 years when the girls were being sexually assaulted by a couple of predators? What were you doing? Did you guys hear about that story about the one lady? She was kidnapped. The guy kept her actually under the bed. He actually scooted the top of the bed off of a box frame, and they smashed her down in there, and they closed the bed over her head. I think she was gone for well over a decade and a half. God. The question of evil is actually a legitimate question. If he is a just, but not just a benevolent, but a just God, he's going to have to say or do something when atrocity happens. When a tsunami kills 250,000 people, God doesn't get a pass. And the whole suffering in this life so that we can better appreciate our bliss in the next is the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard. I cannot believe how anyone can find that satisfying. other than it is their way of equivocating what deeper down what they know doesn't make any sense. When did we start speaking in bumper stickers? Everything happens for a reason. Well, yeah, maybe it does, but it's not a divine reason. At least there's no evidence to support that. And if there was a divine reason, you better tap God on the shoulder and ask him what the hell he's doing. Hey, before I give you a lifetime of allegiance and love and worship, can you tell me about that EF5 twister, would you? And the little children in an elementary school, could we talk about that? Can we talk about why my brother has cancer and lives in excruciating pain? We talk about the guy in London who just last week was hacked to death by Islamic extremists in the middle of the street in front of his wife. We talk about that. What a great opportunity it would have been for Yahweh to go down and show his dominance over the false gods like Allah. If he had reached down and performed a miracle, created a wall of divine protection, or at least tapped the guy on the shoulder and told him, don't walk down this street right now, it's dangerous. Nothing. You telling me that happened for a reason? Well, there was a reason. The reason was hatred, driven by superstitious, religious nonsense. But it wasn't a divine reason. 937, thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Larry.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for calling the show, my friend. Thanks for listening. What's up?
I have to express my chagrin to a degree that every time I think of something to talk about, you say virtually the same thing I was going to say. You mentioned a couple minutes ago about who would buy this sort of thing, and it sounds a lot like William Lane Craig's argument that, oh, but you don't understand, all of these children that were killed were done the ultimate good by God because they get to go to heaven right away.
God, it insults every cell in your body, doesn't it? I mean,
it's ridiculous. Did you see the debate he did with Sam Harris at Notre Dame?
It's possible, but I don't recall it. What happened?
All right. Well, Sam Harris just destroyed him. And then he gets up there and he's like, but God, you know. And it's like you said before, it's the ultimate cop-out, and it goes to the, depending on who you're talking to, they will take it to the most illogical end as far as God having a plan. It's like, well, no, God didn't make that tornado, but he made the weather, and he made this, and he made that, and but on the other hand, he's still, if he exists, like they would say, allowing these things to happen. And if we could pray in school, then, if we lived in a theocracy, then everything would be fine. A look at the theocracies that we have in the world today. Everything's just dandy there, isn't it?
Well, let's hold the same standard to our deity then. If we're going to give him credit for all the good, then he must take responsibility for the bad. And that's a huge gap in this line of reasoning, because the same people who say, if you were to talk to a Ken Ham, you would get, well, there were no tornadoes, there was no severe weather before the fall of man, right?
Okay, gotcha.
At the Creation Museum, they have a whole room dedicated to, Hitler's in there and disease and gang violence. They have a display showing Adam tilling the soil, and there are weeds popping up in the soil. And there is a display that asserts that weeds did not exist before Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. But once they sinned, weeds began to sprout up. There is a display of a dinosaur chewing up a carnivorous dinosaur chewing up another dinosaur, and they blame human beings for the fact that this dinosaur turned carnivorous.
I have heard that every creature on the planet was an herbivore before the fall of man.
They're all just sitting around chewing on leaves and lawn clippings and eating pears and grapes and strawberries and stuff.
Oh, they ate the apple. I'm going to eat you.
You think about, look, if you are going to give God credit for the rainbow and for the mountain sunrise and for the birth of a beautiful child and for a raise at the office. If you're going to give God credit for this meal, thank you, God, for this food, please bless it and nourish it to our bodies and our bodies to your service, then you have to also look at the child who is stillborn and say, hey, God, where were you now? You have to look at the famine and the desolation and the natural disasters and all just the craziness that happens in this world, and hold him accountable and say, look, why will you perform this miracle over here? Why will you help Bob find his car keys, but you let this person lose his eyesight? God, I think he needs to be treated like an adult.
Well, of course, and that kind of touches on another thing that I've heard you say on several occasions about doctors and medical professionals. Things go well, God gets the praise and the credit for it. Things don't, it's either, oh, well, there was nothing they could do, or ultimately, okay, well, God's just taken another soul home. It's just horse shit.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine on Facebook.
I think
go ahead.
Because we are again pattern-seeking creatures. We must overcome our natural inclination to see a pattern in everything. There are patterns out there. Naturally, there are patterns.
People
but I think
see patterns all the time where there are no patterns.
Yeah, I think
that's a common,
as a species, are overcompensating in many cases, trying to find meaning and purpose where there is none. And I think we do ourselves a disservice and we allow this deity or any deity off the hook if we give them credit for the beautiful stuff and we turn our head and blame humankind and the fall of man for the 27 or whatever thousand people that will starve to death today. It just doesn't make any sense,
Yeah, and it's like, I've got to get this in because it's something that you mentioned earlier, and it relates to just one of the best quotes I've ever heard. There's an Irish comedian, Dara O'Brien, and there's a bit where he talks about opposing viewpoints to science on television shows over in the UK, in the interest of, quote, fairness and balance. Yeah. And he gives an example. Somebody says, well, science doesn't know everything. And his response to that is, well, of course science doesn't know everything. Science knows it doesn't know everything. Otherwise, it'd stop.
I've heard that as well. Science doesn't know. You know what? Years ago, they thought this, and now they think that, and they're just going to change again, which is sort of a surrendering of our search for knowledge simply because the evidence continues to roll in. What they see as a negative, I see as a positive. I'm like, I love the fact that science is always checking itself and updating itself.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, anything that you say really is scientifically, up to this point, as far the best we can tell is. Yeah. Some things may as well be a fact or a law or what have you, just because they have, but we may find something different. Some things are just anomalies. Somebody posted on Facebook the other night, they were asking for help with trying to explain to a 70-year-old religious person in a sentence the difference between a theory and a law. And somebody responded with just kind of a link to a Wikipedia page for the answer, and they said, no, it has to be simpler. And so just for the hell of it, I just started looking at some stuff, and I was kind of able to boil it down. A law is a predictor of something. It's happened this way all the time. Up to this point, we assume that it's going to keep happening this way. Nothing has told us anything differently yet. It has absolutely nothing to do with the why or an explanation of why something happens. And a theory is the explanation based on the evidence that we have to this point. And you also mentioned before about equivocation, which is something I think that William Lane Craig is famous for. Any religious person that you may have a discussion / argument with always pulls out the old chestnut, well, it's just a theory. It's like, well, okay, why don't you test the theory of gravity then?
I feel you, my friend.
It's ridiculous.
I am on your page, so...
I hate to take up so much of your time, but I gotta just ask one more thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, quickly.
Do you ever feel like when you're talking to someone who's a religious person and just, it's a God thing, everything happens for a reason, the same old cliches, do you ever wonder, it's like, look, I'm reasonably intelligent. I'm not a genius. And I get this. It wasn't that hard. I mean, I did figure it out because I put a little bit of thought into it. And it's interesting, too, that this is called Everything Happens for a Reason. The way I came across your podcast was I was looking around on YouTube for videos about the Reason Rally.
Well, that's divine providence right there, if I ever heard of it.
That's what God led me to your podcast so that you could help me cement my views as an atheist.
I'm just saying. The Lord works in mysterious ways,
Maybe He wants me to be a Calvinist.
You were like the goldfish laying there suffocating to death on the carpet, and somebody scooped you up and just put you out here in this particular bowl, man. So I'm glad you're here.
Put me in the Thinking Atheist.
Thanks for a great call. I appreciate you, my friend. Let me answer that question on the air, okay?
You're doing a great job.
All right, take it easy.
Bye.
We all have moments of frustration. I often come to the defense of religious people for being good-hearted people, which I believe a great many of them are. I often do find myself, conversely, extremely frustrated that what I consider to be relatively easy to see, it's right here in front of your face. Red flag, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Does no one else get this? And I have to continue to remind myself that for most of these people, it's not about logic. They are responding emotionally. They are circling the wagons around a cherished worldview that they've known their whole life. Everything else is a foreign language to them. These foreign things are scary, and so they protect what they know. Again, it's like the devil right? There's a security in that, and you hold on to it, and the more they try to pull it out of your fingers, the more you clench your fist and try to hang on to it. I see it as a natural human response. There's a little girl in the circle of somebody in my family, and she's 8. Now, she has some crazy, rare kind of cancer, I think. Now, she's 8. She should be doing little girl stuff. She should be being a child. She should be thinking about the next crafts project in school and making friends and watching SpongeBob. She should be doing these little girl things. She should be able to be an 8-year-old girl. And instead, as I understand it, for years, she has been up to her eyeballs in hospitals. And you see the post, today she had a good day. Today she's feeling much better. Some of her hair is starting to grow back. Or today she had a really rough day. We're going to go down and see her. Please pray. We appreciate your prayers. Now, if you believe everything happens for a reason, and I mean a purpose, a blueprint, a design, you have to then say that the reason that this precious, beautiful 8-year-old girl has cancer is because it's all part of a plan. And what kind of an evil bastard would poison a child as part of well, you know what? This life's temporary. Just shut up. Now, I understand her family. I understand what the prayers are about. I understand that I'll pray for you. We're praying. That's in religious vernacular. It's a way for people to give encouragement and remind people that you're being supportive. Hey, we're thinking about you. We love you. There's groping for ways to show support. And so they say, we're praying, we're praying, we're praying, we're praying, we're praying. Meanwhile, the doctors are down there pulling out all the stops, trying to combat this hugely complex attack on this girl's physical body from the inside out. And all the Facebook posts I see, how much I see about the physicians, the doctors, the support staff, the nurses, the scientists, the people who are inventing and developing and implementing the medications and drugs and procedures that are actually keeping this girl alive. Zippo. Look, if you're going to thank God for the birth of a beautiful and healthy child, then you're going to have to hold God accountable for the little 8-year-old that has cancer. He doesn't get credit for all the good stuff, and then you know what? It's a fallen world when something goes wrong. It's a total cop-out. You deserve better. You deserve a more honest life than that. And honestly, you should be able to challenge your father without fear. If fear is the defining characteristic in your quote-unquote loving father-child relationship, you got a problem. I know the Bible says he's a jealous God. I know the Bible says have no other gods. I know the Bible says that God wants you to love him and also fear him. That's kind of screwed up, don't you think? Christopher Hitchens used to talk about it. How immoral is it to tell people to pledge their allegiance to a father they must pledge their undying love to, and also fear? The same God that cooked hell up, by the way. Literally. We don't want you to go to hell. Oh yeah, well, God made it. It's actually his design. He drew up the blueprint for hell. How screwed up is that? Who thinks that up? Hey, you know what? I think I'm going to build a torture chamber. I'm going to make it about this wide by this wide. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to lock the door from the outside. Then we're going to turn up a furnace all around it, and it's going to fry anybody who's inside. By the way, I hope you never go there. It would be tragic. How screwed up is that? 330, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Tommy.
Tommy, thanks for calling. What's up today?
One of the earlier callers you had talked about defining terms, how your definition of random doesn't match up with other people's definition of random.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got done with my freshman year of college. I'm attending the University of Akron. And I took a philosophy class. And one of the things I learned very quickly when we were going over the early Christian theology was that there was always a mix-up with the definition of the terms that they were using. For example, they would define God as the prime mover or define God as the thing that existed before time existed. And for the purposes of their argument, it made sense. But the reality is that these definitions very rarely fit the narrow view of the theology that we have nowadays.
Help me understand what your point is. You're saying that people are using the wrong definitions for the words they use, or that everybody's using a different definition that sort of clashes with each other?
Well, I mean, I think that everything happens for the reason the same way that you do in the terms of cause and effect. But when somebody says that everything happens for a reason because there's a higher power involved, there's just no validation for it other than, well, I believe it.
Somebody's driving a car and it crashes off the hill in the winter. It didn't happen because so-and-so was part of a divine plan. It happened because their tires were balding and there was black ice on the road and it was a hard corner without a guardrail and they were driving too fast and maybe they were distracted because they were playing with the radio. There were reasons it happened, but I'm not using reason in the same way that the religious do.
And yet we have to tiptoe around it because if we use the statement, it happened for a reason, they think we're invoking a higher power. And it's just blatantly false.
So you're saying we need to do a better job of owning and defining the word in the arena of ideas out there.
Right. I think if we're going to validate ourselves in the debate or the conversation spheres, we need to define our terms. And when they don't, we almost get an upper hand.
I like it. I like the idea of, words mean things. Let's define what we mean by the word reason or reasons whenever we're entering the conversation. And we can actually say, you know what? No, I think it did happen for a reason. Here's what I mean by reason. And here's what I think the reasons were. I think that's has a lot of merit. By the way, you say you're in Akron?
Yes.
There's a conference coming your way, October the 19th.
Yeah.
It's called the Sexy Secular 2013 Conference. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, I'm actually an officer in the club that's organizing it, so I'm actually heavily involved in that.
I know there's a lot of folks on the roster, and I don't know what the website is for the event, but if anybody's going to be near Akron on the 19th, the weekend of the 19th, I'd encourage them to check out the event up there in Akron, Ohio. It sounds like you guys are going to have a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. The website is actually sexysecularconference.com, so it's very easy to find.
All right, I got to see this. Sexysecularconference.com. All right. Yeah, all the information's right there on the website. All right. Well, thanks for the heads up, man, and thanks for a great call. I think you've stated much better than I did. Well done, my friend.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take it easy. Let's do maybe one more. 724. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hi, this is Misha.
Misha, thanks for waiting on me. I know you've been on hold for like an hour and 20 minutes, but you made it on the air. What do you think about all this business?
Well, I saw you were talking about this everything happens for a reason bullshit, and I just had to call in because of all the baseless, empty, ridiculous platitudes that people use to comfort themselves. This is the one that boils my blood more than anything. So forgive me for venting, but this just drives me crazy. Like,
all right, just let it out. Come on, I'm just lay back on the therapist couch, and we'll we'll get a little incense burning. We'll get you a hot tea. You can just let it out.
Sounds good. I've got a beer with me right now.
All right, hit me. Come on. What bothers you so much about this?
When people say everything happens for a reason, as you pointed out earlier, they usually aren't talking about simple cause and effect. They're talking about something metaphysical, like a divine hand pulling the strings, putting everything into motion. And it's easy to say this when you're talking about something with relatively minor consequences, like, you get in a small car accident, or you lose out on getting a house or a car that you wanted to buy, or getting out of an abusive relationship or something like that. But when people say this phrase, they generally mean something that everything happens for a good reason. And when they say this, they must also take into account everything that happens in this world, that somehow even the most horrible, evil, screwed up shit must have some underlying good cause that we just can't understand. And that's what I loathe about this phrase, because it implies that 20-something little kids need to be gunned down in elementary school, and that half of a town needs to be wiped out by a tornado, and a guy like Ariel Castro must keep 3 girls locked up for a decade while he rapes and starves and beats them, all in order to fulfill some grand scheme of goodness.
It's an absolute intellectual surrender, isn't it? They just surrender.
It really is.
Yeah.
I really don't think the average person who uses this phrase even stops to think about what it implies. And I think if they did, they would realize just how screwed up it is. I mean, I don't understand how the thought of living in that sort of reality is comforting to people in any way. I mean, it implies that, the supposed benevolent creator of the universe can't think of a better way to execute his plan than to have his favorite creations, the ones that were made in his image, go through this intense suffering.
Well, also, we're talking about the same deity that realized he would eventually have to flood the earth and kill everybody except for 8 people. He knew this before the world began, but he continued with the plan anyway. After that, the fall of man continues, and he had to have his own son executed, and he did it anyway. I mean, you think about it, we have intellectually thrown up the white flag. We've just given up, and now we're speaking in bumper stickers, aren't we? We're speaking in those little pathetic one-liners that people smash onto Facebook, and it makes my left eye twitch every time I see, look, somebody found a Bible inside the debris in Moore, Oklahoma. 24 people are dead, but look, here's a Bible, and look, the pages were open. Did you see President Obama talking about this during his press conference? And he's like, it was open to this meaningful scripture, as if it was a sign. And I'm like, here's a good sign. Why doesn't God show up a couple hours before the twister drops down, and he tells everybody to get the hell out of the way? That'd be a sign, I think, worth embracing, don't you?
Oh, yeah. And another thing, it makes me wonder if, the theists who use this, everything happens for a reason, if they realize that it throws a gigantic freaking wrench into the argument from free will. Because, on one hand, they say God isn't controlling our actions like a puppet master because he gave us free will. But on the other hand, the events in our lives, the decisions we make, the people we encounter, all these things are occurring because there's a predetermined reason for them. You can't have it both ways. That's just logically absurd.
Speaking about that, there are a lot of people who say that we are predestined to either be saved or not be saved. And that one really fries my noodle because I think, wait a minute, if heaven and hell are predestined for each human being alive, then why would a church ever need to schedule a mission trip? Why would anyone ever need to preach an evangelical message? Why would anyone need to do anything? You're predetermined as part of a plan to go to heaven or hell. It's already set in stone. It's not going to change. Why are we jumping through all of these hoops? And again, intellectually, it doesn't even wash, doesn't even add up. Anything else before I move on? Are you good? Do you feel like you've expended all that negative energy into the cosmos?
I'm good. I feel good. I feel great.
Thanks for calling the show, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
All right, take it easy.
You too. Bye-bye.
I think about this crazy world we live in, and I think to myself, a search for meaning is a valid and admirable search. And I mean, even if we're creating meaning in our own lives. The reason the sun came up today, well, there's a reason. An explainable, observable, measurable reason. If there's an earthquake somewhere around the world tomorrow, there will be a reason. If someone commits a good or evil act against another creature, there will be a reason they did it. How did it all come together? There's a reason. Or reasons that it happened. They're not necessarily fair, they're not necessarily seeable in advance, and they're certainly not automatically attributable to a divine eye in the sky. And if you are going to look at this world and say that everything that happens for a reason, you're going to have to look up at your deity and his omnipotent hand and start to hold him accountable for just how dark that plan so often becomes. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight's show and a discussion on whether or not everything happens for a reason. Next week, I'm going to be talking to David Fitzgerald, who's a tremendous guy. He's an author and speaker who's just come out with a new book on the Mormons. And we're going to have a discussion about the Mormon Church. We're going to share the stories of many ex-Mormons, your calls and emails, as we look at one of the most bizarre isolationist cults in the world. It's the Mormons next week on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Take it easy.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.